Welcome to the Dean Kevin Smith New Adventure Series is The Great Witness. I'm Dean Val, the host, and we're going to be listening to Dean Kevin share his experiences with us and see if we can become more aware through them, because these are ways to see ourselves multidimensionally, and that we're not just a physical body, we're more than that. We have 4 other bodies we work, and we're here to help educate people and to see more. So welcome, Kevin.
In this real side experience, I would find myself standing on the top of a large skyscraper type building. It was like one of those large buildings that have a flat roof, and where it is then utilized for recreational purposes. And indeed, there I would be, and in the company of a large group of individuals, and Dwayne. This skyscraper building would stand high and above all other buildings below it, as it seemed to feature in a city, though not a city of a modern current earthly architecture, but more so as though it were a city from the future, as all of it, including the building the group and I were stood upon, had a rather sci-fi, space-age look about it, everything gleaming metal, and of a design that looked very futuristic. With the multi-dimensional nature of creation being what it is, with the life levels as they are, with each level progressively larger than the last, literally speaking, as we might stack them for the personal self to relate better from astral to ethereal, there is endless scope for, and expression of, cities and worlds throughout. So where we were could have been anywhere in the vastness of this creational realm, with just the personal self alone, if the real awareness hasn't been recognized and reconnected with. Where we travel, where we visit, tends to be limited according to the personal self, what it decides, and its consciousness. For everything always is based on a decision, where we place our focus and our intent, and this then affords us the corresponding simulation. And primarily, we can only visit somewhere if we are first aware of it. If we are to set our intent for somewhere, and the personal self will always only have its current lifetime of experience references to draw from, and from these references, the disconnected personal self will rather make its conscious determinations as to destinations when it comes to real side exploration. But then, more often than not, the intent placement or decision as to destination isn't so much conscious, for the unconscious individual will be constantly churning out ideas, thoughts, emotions, being distracted, and having the focus placed on endless phenomena during the one-dimensional, physical level day. And all these are ideas created, ideas agreed upon, and that then will be projecting what they not only will experience on the physical at some stage or reflected form through the cause and effect rollout of the time phases, but on the real side also, as places and situations they may find themselves in, and they will be oblivious of how it is their generating of the effects through the ideas they agree and create that will be constantly affecting the simulations they walk into. Everything is instantly so, as we create and agree with the ideas that we do, and encased in the physical vehicle mechanics that decode the physical level. This will not be apparent, at least not immediately, from the one-dimensional sense. But were we suddenly vacated from the physical vehicle and be on the real side, we would indeed see the instant effects of our idea agreements and creations and intent. And as we have then conscious decision, idea agreement, and intent placement all the way through to unconscious agreements also, through focus and idea creating and agreeing, will also be the subconscious storehouse with all its endless eons of lifetimes of agreements. And despite the individual being unconscious of these subconscious idea agreements, everything the consciousness comprises of, as the consciousness will be held to in overall agreement by a disconnected personal self, will be the equivalent of having every web page ever visited on your computer open at the same time, and so potentially everything of the consciousness, and including the subconscious, can feature on the real side. All the ideas of the consciousness, including all the individuals associated with the agreements, for indeed agreements and attachments with individuals is really agreement to the idea of the individual, the consciousness created personal selves of them. But for the unconscious individual overall, their real side simulation will be based then on their consciousness, and as the unconscious individual is generally focused on the physical, this focus equates to decision to be limited creationally wise, that it's unlikely, if they do explore anywhere of the simulated psych realms, their exploration won't extend far beyond the astral, and more likely as not, they are locked within their own decided idea illusions, like little self-contained bubbles. For again, to explore far greater the dimensions of creation requires first awareness of the vast multi-dimensional nature of the simulator, then the decision to want to explore, then the recognition of these various life levels as we move our awareness through the aspects of the self that correspond with them, and ultimately as we connect with and stand more so with the real awareness that we are, as it is this one overall awareness that is through everything, as it then is through the overall consciousness that expresses into all the simulation throughout creation, so through the real awareness that we are, do we have a full accessibility of creation in its entirety. The personal self can be afforded a view of anything simulated that stems from all the ideas of the overall consciousness, all the ideas that make up the simulator, all as vehicles that the real awareness has the complete overview through, but that will provide the personal self certain experiences that always make the most sense, awareness speaking, for it to be shown. And past, present, or future are not a factor either, as everything ever decided is a part of the overall consciousness, and all effects into the corresponding simulation, and all here and now in this new moment, all as individual idea vehicles that effect simulation, available for the personal self to be shown, as everything is, and so everything, every idea that makes up the simulator as it is now, is here in the nowness of this isness, and what seems as though differentiation of life levels, positions, past and present, are just the idea vehicles the personal awareness is placed within, a real awareness that is through all consciousness created ideas, but a personal awareness that can only deal with but pieces of the whole, as too much simulated visual input at once would be somewhat overwhelming. And so our position in this futuristic city on the skyscraper could have been the simulated effect from any agreement idea vehicle throughout the overall consciousness, and indeed then the higher, literally speaking, we assume positions in the psych realms, the more we can stand beyond the recognitional scope of others, as they so self-limit themselves to small pockets and areas of simulation according to their consciousness, focus, what they recognize, decide, etc. And as we agree with the guides, so we accept their creations also, and can find ourselves in simulated areas that those not in agreement and standing real with life and the guides can't access. Everything from real side experience created scenes to actual places such as the UNUversALLs, etc. Because with anything we create on the real side, effects instant simulation of it, but as we are part of the overall consciousness that affects the simulator we share, we all share the same overall arena, and so we are very much creating within it that others can still impose upon our creations. So if we want to create but limit access to our creations, we rather have to have them beyond the recognitional reach of those we want to deny access from, and any recognitional inadequacy is based on what the individuals have decided and self-limited themselves by. So really, we can just work around the self-imposed limitation of others. And as most, including the dark forces, are predominantly physical astral, as their awareness is encased and limited to these areas, well then, would it make sense to base our creations in areas beyond where the awareness of these individuals allows them to see? Well then, would it make sense to base our creations in areas beyond which these individuals are aware of and have recognition of, the ethereal, for example? But also, the real guides have no consciousness that is interwoven with the overall consciousness that affects the overall simulation, and so, as they make their creations on the real side, it's as though they are not within the overall simulation, the overall arena, but almost a pocket simulated scene or area or place within it, that only agreement with the guides and vice versa can allow that we can access such places. And if this city was a future view, perhaps it is the Earth as it might become, a potentiality then based on agreements that are in free will flux amidst all the other agreements that change and alter as they tend to do, and so only with a consistent agreement focus can anything become so on the physical. But every idea is instantly so on the real side, including every collective consciousness agreement, and these are again, as all ideas are, vehicles that the personal self can view as to the simulation they produce. We can visit all so-called future view ideas and experiences as readily as we can any other. And here we were then, this group of aware, orientated people, as my real awareness discerned that they were, with Dwayne, and here in this future city location, high above it all, on a skyscraper building, where we were discussing many projects and ideas, the details of which my personal self failed to retain on waking, as not everything is revealed to the personal self, unless it's necessary that it is. Sometimes just the overall sense of what's taking place is enough to know at that moment, and perhaps the height of the building providing its own symbology, as anything of an elevated position tends suggest a more expansive view above all else that features in the scene, the sky representing generally the endlessness of the ears as it does, and despite the futuristic nature of the city down below, it would represent ground level, or more the one-dimensional position and view. What followed was a scene in which a group and myself were attempting to approach an individual, a dark force, ill-intended character. For as I have mentioned before, part of our real side assignments involves the gathering and garnering of agreement from wherever we may find it, as all agreement shapes simulation and circumstance, and the more agreement that we secure, which makes sense with life and the natural environment throughout all life levels and awareness overall, the more situations become more favorable for all in the simulator as it pertains to survival, especially with the dark force characters, as through their connections, as they are a part of the overall dark force systems and networks that pervade the overall simulator, and indeed pervade the overall consciousness through the agreements present to the controllers, so can stepping up dark force individuals be instrumental in swinging agreement significantly, and especially if the more highly placed in the dark force hierarchy they happen to be, as their decisions, their intent, will impact then what transpires in regards to the maintenance or not of the overall consciousness to agreements to control, that effect into all the simulated lives of all in agreement with the controllers, as such agreements allow the dark forces to do whatever they wish with those controlled. And if more dark force characters do step up, so may a loosening of the noose be so for those and their planets that they control, an unravelling of agreements that until there are, limit individuals and their experience, that as these controlling agreements are released, or the ideas of control lessened or eased, may then allow more so beneficial situations to be so, such as the various alien beings who are agreeable to make their presence known on Earth for its benefit, working with the guides, etc., but that a rigid overall agreement to the controllers disallows, as everything is based on agreement, and as long as the controllers have control of the agreements through the human consciousness, they can mould and manage the consciousness that such events are less likely or impossible to take place, and simulated circumstances and planetary situations aside, consciousness overall, as it is clung to and agreed with all the ideas of restriction it contains, like an overall computer with too much data overwhelming it, so all the restriction clung to through the ideas of all consciousness, as a consciousness overall affects the simulator, so this affects a simulator deteriorating and spiraling into demise. And so for every individual that becomes more aware, that begins to slowly release agreement with the restricting ideas of the consciousness, like clicking off all the files we have that overburden the computer, so this eases off the impact on the simulator, and it's potentially possible that it need not necessarily go through its final stages of decay to implosion. And so every individual is precious, in that they will begin, as they become more aware, to release their contribution to simulator implosion as they decide to go about their awareness processes and gradually let the clung to consciousness go. As we all are this real awareness, that's purpose is to recognize the ears that it is a part of, regardless of what we had decided to create, our intent. If we chose to be a controller or agreed to be a slave, whatever our choices may have been while locked into a personal self, that we thought was what we were. And as it is that agreements dictate our ability to enter the simulation of others, so to approach dark force individuals, or anyone for that matter, we either need to have secured their agreement, or we can find another way into their simulation less directly. We all share the same overall simulator that we all effect, and so this sharing of the ideas that effect the overall arena is then an overall experience platform we all operate within, like a large computer game where all the players reside in the same simulated world. What limits accessibility of individuals from each other on the physical level is additional ideas decided that incorporate their simulation, as these may affect certain geographical distances, obstacles, etc. On the real side, individuals can be more unreachable, as they reside within their little bubble illusions of decision, which are as expansive and creational in incorporating or limiting as they decide, but with the overall consciousness still rather interconnected, as it affects the overall simulator arena, so the same applies as it is on the physical in actuality, as it really is one overall consciousness that affects the entire simulator. And so with the real awareness being through all consciousness, can it find the areas of the simulator, those that we are seeking, reside in, and then place the personal self in the appropriate idea vehicle that is a part of the affected position where our target individual dwells. For without the real awareness and its overview of everything creational through the overall consciousness, how would the personal self alone know who to approach and where to find them? As to experience what we do, we need to be firstly aware of the particulars, so that such an intent be set, but with the overall intent being to become more aware and recognize the ears, all our real side activities will be toward that end, as a part of the process is sharing and promoting the ease as we earn our way, including all the galactic assignments and the approaching of individuals, and as we agree, open up to, embrace life and the real awareness, as our personal intent aligns with the real intent of the real awareness, so we will always be doing that which makes sense with life and awareness overall, and the personal self will be delivered to these various experiences and into the presence of the individuals we need to approach through the real awareness that can access anything and anybody throughout the simulator. And on this occasion, I and a group would be travelling to an island via a boat, a rather quaint, old-fashioned boat, like you might see from centuries past, as we had been then delivered into the simulation of the individual we sought, and as we engaged with it, as we presented a personal idea, a form that would engage with it, we rather were dealing with the simulated idea of this individual's arena, as though stepping into someone else's game and agreeing therefore to be somewhat resigned to its mechanics and structure, for as long as we remained a simulated part of it. At any time we could withdraw agreement from the idea of it, for you only remain the effects of ideas if you maintain agreement with them, and although the individual whose simulation bubble it was must agree to let individuals in, it is their game after all, but what they don't realise is they rather already have, as the multi-dimensional nature of the creation of the psych realm levels stems from an overall collective consciousness that makes them so, and these then are multi-levels of the same game that every individual shares, and rather like the physical level then, it's just a matter of accessibility. And overall then, there is a multi-dimensional stadium from physical to etheric that is based on ideas shared by all consciousness that makes it so, and depending on the individual, dictates the best means of approach. Because we all are multi-dimensional, our awareness is through everything, but with the personal self-immersed individuals, they will have locked their personal awareness in specific, limited areas of creation, that we can approach them anywhere in creation, even real awareness to real awareness, and everything must filter through to the position they have encapsulated themselves in, but far better to find them on their own encapsulated bubble turf, so to speak, wherever that might be on the real side. If it is the real side we are approaching them on, and for most that would rather be the astral, if it were an actual life level we were engaging with them on. But if we were not to approach them via a life level open arena, as for some individuals, they are so one-dimensional they may even not have an awareness or recognition of even the astral, so we will fail to be able to glean their attention even there. But we can, however, enter their little simulated bubbles of decided illusion instead. And to enter such bubbles, we do need agreement to do so, as these are like little simulations within the simulated overall arena. And even though we can observe them from the real awareness position that is through everything creational, we are aside from the simulation in that position, and so unless we directly enter the simulation and engage with it, we can see them, but they rather can't see us. Fortunately, through the endless agreement interconnections through the consciousness, mostly subconscious, we can, or rather the real awareness can, find doors and ways in. For again, if there is any agreement between two consciousnesses, then this rather presents as a kind of a conduit through which we can enter their simulation. And if we can't find an agreement conduit between our consciousness and theirs, we can find other individuals that have agreements with us and the one we seek to approach, and so rather a case of able to enter the simulation of this other individual, and as this individual has an agreement with the one we are targeting, through this other individual we can enter the target's simulation, a kind of roundabout way of reaching our objective. Because if we are in agreement with another consciousness, we agree with every idea it comprises of, which includes all agreements with others, and so the simulation of the one we are in open agreement with is available, including the simulation of all those the individual has agreements with, even though we don't have direct agreements with these others. A little like being able to get to an individual that is seemingly inaccessible through affiliation with someone they know, just as people might on the physical. But with these dark force characters, they tend to have a greater awareness than the one-dimensional indoctrinated slaves generally, an awareness which still only goes so far, but it affords a greater ease of approach, as we will be more apparent to them up to a certain point, life level wise. But again, if the dark force character is elusive and retained in bubbles of illusion on the real side, either direct agreement is required, or these backdoor agreements, through affiliations with others, we and the dark force character shares. And so, as I said, a group and I were approaching by boat, as though playing within the parameters of this particular dark force character's simulation, or perhaps it was an actual position on one of the life levels, wherever it may have been. Either way, As we enter a simulation, we rather play by its geographical rules, like entering a computer game and being resigned to its design, although we can skip and jump certain features and hurdles. The real awareness can insert the personal self at any point in it, and when we are personal self inserted, through the recognition that we are only as limited as what we decide, we rather can bend the simulations we are in and manipulate them as we see fit. And as we have effectively secured agreement to be in the individual's simulation, or if it's a life level position, the agreement is then already there through the overall collective consciousness that must be in a shared idea agreement to effect the life levels. They are agreeing with everything that we are about, our intent, abilities, our consciousness. If you agree to let a monster into your experience, say, you rather are deciding to experience that which the monster is, its decided consciousness, intent, etc., and you have to then rather deal with it. In this case, as we disembarked from our boat, as we found ourselves on an island, we rather knew that the individual we were approaching was expecting us and hadn't exactly directly agreed to our presence, but more that we had secured a backdoor agreement with an agreement intermediary, who was a dark force character in his own right. Naturally so, as you would expect, direct agreement would always be between those whose intents and inclinations converge. But this dark force character was stepping up and assisting us, and was rather then providing us with this backdoor agreement access to the one we sought, and would lead us deep into the island, to where the one we were attempting to approach resided. Again, perhaps, being guided was unnecessary. We could have just popped into the presence of the one we sought. But the more the experience presents as an adventure, the more it retains in the memory on waking. We were led to a kind of fenced area. Our guide would show us a gap in it, and we would enter and proceed on. Our guide would go no further, assisting, yes, but rather fear-racked for doing so was he, and he wanted no further involvement at this moment. So rather a case that our target hadn't agreed with us directly to be here, but knew that we had entered his simulated area nonetheless, as were my impressions. So he rather was resigned to receiving us. And indeed, we would come across an open area where he had prepared quite the reception. A large gathering of individuals were there, and the individual in question presented as a kind of emperor or king, and he had rather an Eastern sense about him, and indeed he looked somewhat oriental, dressed in elaborate and colourful attire. Our purposes for approaching him would be as it is for any individual, dark forces included, to attempt to glean agreement, to assist with the galactic endeavours, and with always opportunity of the ears presented to all we encounter. And although this individual, very well placed and influential as were my impressions, put on rather a show that he was keen to assist and step up, I determined his insincerity, and indeed he would even proclaim how as a token of goodwill he would present us with a gift. A kind of carriage would approach, pulled by horses, and within seemed to be a selection of hideously mutilated and disfigured women, and my impressions revealed that they had been tortured to the extent by this emperor that even though their body forms were human, they barely resembled such any longer. Clearly the recipients of this emperor's decided inclinations, that of the abuse and torture of others, as most of the dark force characters are intended to be, as this is their sensation, their thrill, their decided means of keeping themselves amused. And these mutilated women had what seemed to be explosive devices cruelly inserted into their very bodies. The explosives partially exposed that you could see the mechanics of them, however. The idea was that these women would be primed to explode when they came into proximity with us, and we were suddenly surrounded by all the other individuals here, any means of escape cut off, as these mutilated human bombs dropped from the carriage and shuffled towards us, evidently agreeable and resigning themselves to their predicament. And of course then it was rather apparent as to the emperor's lack of sincerity, impressions aside, and little more could we do here, and so we simply withdrew from the simulation. As much as agreements allowed our presence here, retracting them allowed our immediate departure, and as long as we cling on to nothing of the ideas incorporated with the simulated situation, and that includes not creating any additional idea, thought, or emotion in response to what's occurring, as this rather binds you to the ideas you had reacted to through the personal self. And so one rather retracts agreement, steps into the nowness of the real awareness, true being state, absent of anything created through the personal self that would prevent this, and the personal self is pulled from the simulation, and we are aside from everything creational in our real awareness position, and where we go next is according to what makes the most sense with our real awareness and life. So as can be seen, we are approaching all that we can, but how we are received and our success is always according to the free will of the individuals involved, and this would be then another example of our continued efforts in this regard.
Wow, that's interesting how you explain that. And yeah, our thoughts go into the multi-universes. I mean, each thought goes somewhere in creation, whether we develop it or enhance it or pay attention to it is whatever, but each thought is out there someplace. So it's interesting how and then from that we create consciousness, especially with others. We create these consciousness bubbles with each other. And it's interesting how you say that, we can get through to somebody through another person, a third party that has the same agreement as the person we're trying to contact. And that's so very true here in the physical as well as other levels. Dwayne was talking the other day, yesterday actually, about how fragile this is kind of on the side here, but how fragile our what are the awareness is, I guess you could say, here in the physical. We can be distracted so very easily by something. So it's really important to be sincere and pure as we can to keep our focus. Otherwise, things can take us out very easily here in creation. And really, it's important to know all our bodies and how they work: physical, astral, causal, mental, and etheric, because each of these bodies can take us out. And he cited his example how from 2003 to 2007, 2006, he wanted to step back and he wanted to rest. Basically, he was going too fast forward, but that took him out. It was not something that he learned a lot from it, but he didn't have to do that, basically, because that put him in a position of really aggravated state. A lot happened during that time. He learned from it, learned what not to do, but what he learned is to keep focused, so you don't have to go through the hell he went to, because he had this idea, I guess you could say, to step back, rest. But that was, again, as an idea. He lost his focus to just continue on with becoming more aware, contributing. So use sincerity and purity to stay focused. That's like a tool to stay focused and not get distracted. Any little thing can get you offline. Example of a jet airplane going really, really fast, and that's how the consciousness nowadays is going. People are into this consciousness. It's just going so fast, everything day by day. So any little diversion, just like a jet plane, you're going to go off mark a whole lot, not just a little bit. But since you're going so fast, you're going to go off mark a lot. And each one of us, like you say, Kevin, once we become more aware, it kind of releases the aggravation or the pressure on the whole of the simulator, the whole of creation. As people wake up, it lessens the need to dissolve itself or for the simulator and creation to implode upon itself, because it releases the pressure on it from the consciousness that people are agreeing to, which is mainly their own demise and the demise of creation, which they don't see. So the wake up, like you said, of each person is very important. Each person makes a huge difference. And it's interesting how you find these people in their bubble turf, you term it, roundabout way of making contact with people on the real side. Everybody's somewhere that you can locate them. They're to be found somewhere through their attention. And yes, we're looking for agreement in our own way here. And that's just because, well, we're looking for agreement for people to step up and do something in a way, you know, to wake up, because that makes a difference with the whole of things. We're not looking for agreement for any agenda or anything like that. It's more for the benefit of everybody. So that agreement it's huge that we get with people. And there's very few people that see through it through its whole, you know, end, you could say. End is right now and here and now. But most people stop someplace along the line where they think they know something, or they think, you know, they want to be like a heaven or some kind of idea. They stop there instead of keep on going, because you have to keep going with this. It's just the way it's set up. It's ongoing, becoming more aware and expanding into more and more of the isness. And I guess that's all, but thank you. That was well said and very, very well described, how you do this with your group on the real side. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, that's the beauty, I suppose, of, even though we have individual consciousness, it really is an interconnected consciousness and overall consciousness that affects the overall simulator. So therein lies, if there is an interconnectedness of consciousness, therefore there must be an interconnectedness of ideas shared by all consciousness that affects overall the foundation life levels of the entire simulator. So therein of itself are agreements there with the same shared ideas, which then allow accessibility to effectively anybody can find anybody else. And as I said, it's just what then presents as obstacles or makes that ability to find another harder is simply the additional ideas that the individual has placed as agreed or decided upon, that then presents as certain situations to overcome, like geographical distances and such. Because as I said, it's like I will, for example, I share the same base idea agreements that affect the same overall simulator as my next door neighbor as readily as I would an alien from another star system. But of course, the difference between the alien and my next door neighbor would be additional ideas in their individual consciousness that have affected other particulars, and that then presents as obstacles, which would expressed through as the distance geographically between me in relation to my next door neighbor and me in relation to this alien from another star system. And I always found that it takes quite a while to get, you know, the focus and the focus you need for this, and the focus is always being more so refined and made more so. It's because really with focus, if you were 100% focused and 100% with it, then presumably then your process would be complete, because you can't be 100% with the ears unless there is nothing else that is detracting from that 100%, and anything else detracting from it must be the personal self. So if you are still working through the personal self and dealing with the tap lines and facing the self and all of creation that it affects, and the consciousness is a part of the overall collective consciousness that affects the overall creation, then that must represent then you're not quite there yet. And so as that focus continually builds, and I found myself the best way to maintain that focus is to keep as busy as possible doing that which makes sense in regards to sharing this reality and promoting the guides and the ears. And so individuals may think that, I perhaps will do a little bit today, and then for maybe the rest of the day and tomorrow I'll watch TV and do something else, and they think it won't harm or impact adversely their process. But of course, what they don't realize is that the ideas then that they cater to, and there's nothing wrong with doing these things and playing with the ideas in creation, but as you said, it's very easy to be distracted and sidelined by them. And pretty much all the ideas we are presented with, the distractions and phenomena, are based on the dark force reptilian design, and with them will be attached a lot of subliminal, subconscious baggage ideas also. And so what may seem like, as an example, innocent games and computer games on the surface are anything but, as they have all sorts of baggage of ill-intended intentionality lurking behind them that it's very easy for individuals to get sucked in. And so I find with myself, it's important to keep as busy as possible, as this is certainly an aid to focus. And I remember Dwayne said that the personal self is almost like a little puppy dog constantly pulling at your pants, trying to get your attention, and almost like a constant nagging feeling. And I can certainly testify to that, because as long as you have the personal self, it's almost like, I liked how Dwayne described it, it's almost like an irritating fly buzzing in the background, almost constantly poking at you, wanting your attention, and trying to convince and justify the want to do that which it wants to do, which appeals to the personal self. And this strange sort of nagging feeling that's constantly there, this like this fly buzzing in the background, if you do cater to the personal self and do what it wants, and then almost step into the personal self consequently, that nagging feeling, that buzzing thing is gone. And which then, because basically you've catered to the personal self, and so it no longer needs to nag at you any longer. And so I find that actually a good indication that you are very much focused and on your process is that you will experience this nagging feeling, because the nagging feeling is only there because you're putting the personal self aside, and the personal self is vying for attention. And so, and eventually, as Dwayne says, if you keep not catering to the personal self, eventually the nagging will become less, and you'll become less aware of this nagging, buzzy fly sensation in the background, until eventually it will fade away, and as you continue to let the personal self go. But that does seem to be part of it as well. So I just thought I'd add that. So.
Yeah, and another angle to that is don't get too comfortable with the personal self. I mean, give it some aggravation on your own side. You know, give it. I wouldn't say discipline, but give it. You know, if you make it so it's too comfortable for you, secure and safe, I mean, then you're really indulging in that personal self. REBISAR says, you know, live dangerously. So it's more like that. You got to go out on a limb. You know, you got to go take the risk, because that's where you do, again, get away from the personal self and see more of what's out there instead of what you already know. So it is very interesting, the personal self, and how do we manage it, which is part of how we, you know, help educate people and ourselves. How do we manage the personal self? It doesn't mean abuse it or be, you know, like an Indian guru, like abuse it somehow, deny it necessarily. It's just managing it, what makes sense with it. So it's in alignment with the other. Well, you're aligning all your bodies to the real awareness, managing all your bodies.
In this real side experience, I would be on assignment again. Most of my real side assignments involve traversing a creation from one end to the other, locating aliens, species and beings, and extending them the opportunity of becoming more aware, to bring them around to assist with the galactic projects for this overall wake-up. There also seems to be a lot of assignments that involve the acquisition of technology and its application in some beneficial form or other, and I have had many experiences where my group and I are securing a technology that's either been provided by agreeable aliens, or that which we are stealing from dark forces and ill-intended beings less content to supply it. Regardless, we are operating from real awareness, intent, and sincerity of a beneficial purpose. Often robots or robotics are involved, with our technology acquiring orientated operations. Either we assume these forms or we encounter them, and those we encounter present as facilitators of our endeavors or resistance. In this real side experience, it seemed we were to acquire some technology or other, but it wouldn't be a simple undertaking by any stretch. The personal self at a loss generally as to most of the specifics. Details regarding the nature of the technology, what its precise purpose was, and the means and mechanisms by which we seem to be carrying out these assignments. The real awareness does what it does, and the personal self just relates what transpires. Anyway, I would begin in the company of one individual, and he would have in his possession a version of the kind of technology we were to be securing. He would reveal its capabilities, and it seemed to have the ability to manipulate creation, as were my impressions. As he activated it, it seemed to bend light and cause dimensional overlap, as though different dimensions that are frequency separated could be brought into a temporary conjunction, and visually it would look as though there was a kind of slice absent from the scene we were in, and replaced by occurrences from another dimension. He even warped and bent light around himself that rendered him invisible, and made his body form alter in various ways. It surely was quite the entertaining spectacle, and when he was finished, he informed me how he had managed to secure me a spot with a group who were to secure technology similar to that which he had just displayed. Apparently, it had been quite the challenge to get me into this group, for as far as this group were concerned, I had nothing to offer them, nor would I provide any additional benefit or have any skill they required that they didn't already possess within their number. On the surface, this indeed was so, but there was something that I would indeed bring to the adventure that they were unaware of, and to keep this a secret was in fact essential for their success and indeed survival, as I will explain. This group were actually a group of robots, or cyborg-type individuals, and distrustful of anyone not of their group. Yet they had agreed to secure this technology and surrender it to me, presumably as a result of some negotiation that they deemed as beneficial. A mutually beneficial arrangement, as this technology would be instrumental in developments to come, and this is why I wished to acquire it, and in return these robot cyborgs would benefit also, in ways that were never revealed to me in this experience, but perhaps the details are not important, just the overall sense of this arrangement. The idea was that these robots would gain access to a facility that was guarded by another robotic being of great power and size, a very dangerous robot guardian that could easily destroy this robot group. However, it seems that the robotic team had over time gained the trust of this giant robotic guardian, but it was a trust based on false pretenses. They were going to supply this robot guardian with something, and so the guardian would allow them access to his facility, but in fact the robotic team were to steal this particular technology from the guardian, the technology we sought. My impression was it was more that they would download information regarding the technology and its construction, almost like you would download data from a Wi-Fi field onto your cell phone, and this required proximity to the computers where the data was stored, hence the need to breach the facility, or in this case, negotiation, which allowed their access based on the deception of supplying the robot guardian with whatever he deemed agreeable enough that he would allow the robot team access. The trouble was, the moment the robotic team would download the data, their data pilfering would be detected by the Guardian robot, and the far smaller in comparison robot data thieves would be in great peril. Nevertheless, they were prepared to take this risk on, as securing this technology in a data form and giving it to me would in turn afford them their beneficial end of the deal. But as I said, they didn't want me to accompany them, as there wasn't anything I could venture or offer in addition that would be of benefit. They seemed to like to operate as a group without any additional individuals added to it. They seemed very skilled in technology stealing of this kind, and perhaps it was a case of if you needed tech stealing, these were the robots to call. And indeed, it was therefore understandable as to why they didn't wish my presence. But unbeknownst to them, I had carried out a previous assignment in which I had acquired a kind of a crystal that would in fact afford them protection from the giant robot guardian. The reason I had to keep this a secret from the robot tech stealers was that any information that became known to them was stored in their databases, just like any computer, and it seems the large robot guardian could access all stored data from every robot that came into his presence. A kind of robotic mind reading, if you will, evidently a good defense mechanism, as anything robotic entering his facility with deception in mind would be instantly determined. I'm uncertain why the giant robot wouldn't then read the overall tech data stealing objective, but perhaps the robot team had accounted for this problem in some way or other. But whatever their methods for concealing this deception from the Guardian, it wouldn't extend to their ability to hide knowledge of this crystal that would provide them protection. Who can say why this was? But this was the situation. Maybe this blocking or firewalling of data information from being accessed took considerable time and delicacy, and if they have a tendency to steal tech, as seems to be their decided function, they had already ensured that this curious blocking of this overall intent from other robots was in place, and maybe then they wouldn't have the time, patience, or even ability to make the further adjustments to block access to further data regarding extra details of deception, like a crystal of protection. So I had acquired the crystal and kept it secret. This was my reason for wanting to accompany them on their dangerous assignment, and it had been quite the task to persuade them to allow me to join them. The individual I mentioned from earlier, instrumental in securing me my spot by whatever convincing means he had. Perhaps that individual had been a real guide, setting up this situation and adventure like they tend to do. Then we decide to carry it out or not, all for an overall awareness benefit and the possibility of technology acquisition that may be useful in regards to galactic overall situations to come. And so, regarding the acquisition of this protection crystal, this was also an assignment that had been facilitated by the same individual who had arranged my contact with the tech-stealing robot team and managed to convince them to allow my accompanying them. I would follow this individual, and another, a female also, would join us on this adventure as we travelled to a curious realm or dimension, a dark place indeed, a place of desolation, where nothing natural seemed in evidence, a broken world of twisted metal. It had the look of a planet that had succumbed utterly to technology, and that this had somehow resulted in its destruction, nothing remaining apart from the metallic debris that littered this world. Curiously were the beings that seemed to exist here, as they were like shadow people and roamed aimlessly through this broken metal world. It was in fact difficult to perceive these shadow beings, as though they were barely perceptible, and indeed they were very dangerous. Aimless as they seemed to be, they had the inclination to be drawn to anything entering their presence that was not of their own kind, and sort of assimilate them, and then the individual they had assimilated would be part of their strange, shadowy-like body forms. Very few individuals, if any, ventured to this dark and dismal place, but this was the risk they took, if they indeed chose to do so, the possibility of being assimilated by these dark shadow beings, a risk we were taking on ourselves. As I said, we were here to secure this crystal, whatever it was, but it had a kind of emitting frequency that would ensure the robot's team survival in the presence of the robot guardian. When it realized they had downloaded and stolen data and would then intend their destruction. My group, the individual leading it and the woman, had one defense against these shadow beings. We had some kind of tech that would not only cause the shadow beings to become more apparent if they entered our proximity, for as I said, they were difficult to discern until it was too late, but also it seemed this technology had the ability to repel them. The crystal we wanted was in the keeping of a kind of a scientist, and it was a highly prized and sought item. It was as though the scientist had been given the keeping of it, and had concealed himself here in this forbidding realm, presumably because few would come here, or assume anyone would be hiding out in such a dangerous spot in creation, regardless of the value of whatever it was they wanted kept safe. I imagine the dark forces would want to get their hands on this crystal with its frequency properties, as it seemed of great value, so perhaps could be used for great benefit, as was our intention with it, or great misuse, and for controlling purposes, as would be the controller's inclination. Whatever the crystal was, it seemed to be not only as a means of survival against the robot guardian, but could have further uses also, for who knows what. As I said, it was a very sought after and potentially dangerous item, as though unique and irreplaceable, maybe some kind of advanced tech in and of itself, but it looked just like a crystal to my eyes. The scientist wasn't in any peril, for he had somehow disguised himself as a shadow being also, and this seemed enough to prevent the genuine shadow creatures from attacking him, as though they would not harm their own, or what looked like their own. And so the scientist would remain responsible for the keeping of this crystal, and disguised here as a shadow being, keeping the crystal safe from the ill-intended. But perhaps he had been approached by the real guides, and assured of their good intentions regarding the crystal and its beneficial applications, in the very least for affording safety to the robot team, for their acquiring data that would be instrumental in regards to creating a technology for beneficial reasons. He had agreed, therefore, for a group to come to the realm he was hiding in, and he would surrender the crystal to their keeping, and so here we were, warding off the shadow beings with our technology repellent, which seemed to be a certain light frequency, and we would reach a kind of bunker. Another shadow being would suddenly enter, and we backed up against the wall. We automatically shone our tech light upon it, making it more visible to the eye, not taking any chances, as we targeted the light upon the shadow being. It had no effect, because this shadow creature was the scientist, and only the genuine shadow creatures were repelled by the light frequency. The shadow being before us transformed into an individual, a man with a shock of unruly hair and clutching the very crystal we sought to his chest. He determined our credentials as the ones he was to give the crystal to. But just then the woman of our group would transform into a kind of giant bipedal rat and attack me, trying to wrest the crystal from my grasp. Seems although she had accompanied us, she harbored deception, and if the man leading our group was a guide, and my impressions was that he was, I'm sure he would have known of this. But perhaps the woman wasn't fully committed, wavering between sincerity of real intent and assisting, or carrying out this attack, as though she had been bought off by the dark forces, but was torn between betrayal or remaining standing with the sincere intended, and the guide gave her every chance to see what she would do, and to let it play out as it would. She evidently had decided, and tried to secure the crystal to presumably hand it over to the dark forces that she had now fully committed to pitch in with, taking the dark deal, as it were, or whatever they had offered her. Her identity would remain a mystery to my personal self, but she had been an individual on her awareness process, or she wouldn't have accompanied us here, working with the new friends, the aware individuals, and the guides up until this point. But her real intent and focus must have fluctuated, as she was tempted by the darker forces. The leader of our group, the guide, shook his head in almost disappointment for the poor choice she had made, pulled her from me, and hurled her aside. It seems the reason for her rat-like transformation was a clear representation of her decided affiliation, taking on the form of something reflecting her ill choices. She would scuttle off, unsuccessful in her sneaky rat objective, and probably would receive repercussions from the disillusioned and unimpressed dark forces that she had failed. We would fade from the scene, just the leader of our expedition, the guide, and myself. What became of the scientist, I'm uncertain, but I'm sure he would have been provided safe passage for his assistance and the ensuring of the safety of the crystal up until this point, or maybe he had his own means of extraction. He did seem rather technologically gifted and capable. And so, with the crystal secured and secretly stashed in my pocket, I was now in the scene with the robot data stealing team as we approached a large metallic door that led into the facility we sought entry of. One of the robots communicated through some kind of technology panel on the door's surface to the mighty robot guardian within, and with a metallic hiss, the door yielded, sliding upwards, and entry was granted. As was the plan, these robots had somehow managed to conceal their intent, locking the data information so that it couldn't be accessed. For as the giant robot guardian loomed over us, he was surely scanning through their databases. Satisfied, he would open his huge hand, and one of the robotic team placed something within it, some tech or other that the giant guardian desired, that he was willing to grant the robot team access for. And now the dangerous part, as the robots in proximity to the array of computers lining one wall of this facility began to swiftly hack in and download the data for the tech we required. And of course, the huge guardian robot was instantly aware of this, but the download stealing of data so swift as to be instantaneous, and the robot team and I attempted to evacuate the facility. But this giant guardian somehow had the ability to take control of the robot team's very bodies, to freeze them in place, with the intention then of smashing them to pieces. He disregarded me as though I was of little concern, advancing on the robotic data thieves menacingly. And here is where my crystal came into play. A crystal the Guardian hadn't been aware of as he scanned the smaller robots' minds, as I hadn't informed the robots of its existence, nor the assignment I had previously executed to secure it. I walked up to the behemoth robot as it was just about to crush the immobilized robot team, and proximity seemed to be required for the frequency that this crystal emitted to take effect, and the result was that it disintegrated the robot guardian into fine particles by whatever mechanism of the crystal that made that so, and the robotic team were saved. They were very surprised naturally, as they hadn't realized I had this crystal in my possession, or what it was capable of, and now the reason for my insistence on accompanying them became clear. We had the crystal, which was a very powerful item in and of itself, and would be very beneficial if in the right hands, and more importantly, we had the data download for the technology that now could be constructed, technology that was essential, apparently, for future developments. This robot team would receive whatever had been negotiated for their assistance, and perhaps they would also choose to step up more so, carry out more assignments with us, become more aware, earn their way through the beneficial contributions they provided, and continue to help offset the simulator situation through their choosing to partake in their own process to recognize the is and stand in their real awareness. For they, like all individuals, regardless of body type, are animated by this real awareness, as every individual is this precious, real awareness that, if recognized and stood in the nowness of, supports the whole of life. And so the adventure ended there and had been successful, and we shall see what plays out beyond this point.
We are doing it. You are seeing your part, and every person that steps up, yes, it's all about intent. So it's very important for those that want to take part, yes, in this whole adventure and saving the earth and doing something real here. No, that's so cool. And I like the beginning where you explain, the basics of what's going on and what we're doing here, which is very, very good. So, yes, step at a time. And yes, getting the robots, the robot communities to agree, because they're in danger of being extinct also. And actually, I would say that, because they're set up a particular way, they make more sense of things. They can, go back and forth and assimilate better than many times personal people. You see what's going on, just like the gal that, I'm sure someone we know that all of a sudden she changed her mind because she's not seeing it. And that's the whole idea here, is that, people aren't really seeing what this, not even getting a peek at what the true reality life is, still considering things in creation. And it's really kind of silly. You gain all this knowledge to get a better idea of things, but then you stay in your old routines. Well, again, it's a choice, isn't it? So the robotics and the computers, they become self-sufficient in their own way and self-aware of themselves and aware of the choices that people make and how vulnerable they are with their free will. And so it becomes very interesting challenge that we meet all these individuals, etc. I see this. So yes, those that have a real intent for this, sincerely, are there too. Of course, I see this. I see what's going on. And the overall, and as it all comes together, is going to be very, very interesting, because it's got to come to be something. But there's just a lot of steps to it because it's huge. And at the same time, the AI itself and what the world controllers and beyond this planet are doing is continually expanding their tech. So it's moving into those areas, but eventually get a grasp on some form of agreement to where we can create a basis that really works, and a lot of fun for all of us. Yes.
Great, you did it. You saved the day, Kevin. It's great. So we see that not everything's set in stone. People think there's destiny, but see how you got into this group. You're in a way you earned your way. You finally did earn your way by saving the day here with the crystal. But we can put ourselves in these positions by earning our way or being clever, creative. If we want something, destiny is not set in stone. We can maneuver ourselves any way we want in creation. So this is so cool. And just on the side, just all are welcome. That people that are doing things against others and harming others, I mean, there's always a chance for them, always an opportunity to change or to make better decisions for themselves. And like Dwayne has said, the biggest risk takers sometimes are the ones that are, almost more apt to make better choices because or to come about, turn around because they are the risk takers. They're taking the risk to be evil. Of course, if you're too evil, then it's not going to work. But if you're like this woman here in your group, I mean, she was ousted, but for a while she was wavering, it looked like. So a lot of people are turning that are on the so-called evil side. They're seeing their futility and they're making better decisions. And that doesn't mean you have to be good. It just means, better decisions for your survival and in creation, so you can see through creation and see the real universes. I mean, this is the whole point, waking up. And the guides are very patient with us. They let us commit ourselves many times for us to go through experiences that they're very patient, just like the controllers are very patient. Things are going along in their own time, and we have total freedom of choice. And many times the real guides, well, I see most of the time they won't interfere. They'll give us nudges and hints, but they won't interfere to our decisions because we have to go through these things ourselves. Thanks, Kevin. Another Netflix series episode. Very good. Thank you very much. So, you.